Hello, my name's Joshi, and I love historical fiction. Hello friends! So, as you probably know, historical fiction is probably my favourite genre. In fact, I think most of you who are subscribed because of videos that I've made about historical fiction. However, I am also a very picky reader, which means that a lot of historical fiction passes me by and I don't notice it. I thought that in order to rectify that, this year I would read the Goodreads Choice Awards shortlist for the best historical fiction written in 2020. Now, I don't use Goodreads as much anymore. I've moved over to the Storygraph, but the Storygraph doesn't have their own choice awards, and I feel like Goodreads is the only one that specifies genres in this way, and also is very popular and is a one that is kind of a popularity contest rather than one that is voted for by judges. But this means that, generally speaking, the book that wins in each category is actually the one that most people have read, rather than people having read all of them and deciding which one is their favourite. So you can usually judge before you've even started which one is going to win. So the way that the Goodreads Awards work is that there is an initial round where there are 15 books that Goodreads has chosen that you can vote for, but you can also write in your own favourite in that genre, and the five that get the most write-in votes get to go to the semi-final. However, because the votes for the first round and the semi-final are added together, the write-in ones never get into the final. So I guess that means I won't be reading those ones. But I'm just going to talk you through what the list is at the moment. So there are 20 books on this list now. I have read 3 of the books that are currently on the list, which is The Mirror and the Light, probably one of my favourite books of the year. A Long Petal of the Sea by Isabel Allende. I liked it, but I didn't love it. And Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. Again, I really liked it, but it's not one of my favourite books of the year. Hopefully all 3 of those will be getting into the final 10 and I won't need to read everything else. The other ones that I have on my pile or have heard of is The Night Watchman by Louise Erdrich, Betty by Tiffany McDonnell, Magic Lessons by Alice Hoffman, The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue, The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennet, The Evening and the Morning, Ken Follett, and The Book of Longings by Sue Monk Kidd, and Shaggy Bang. Those are all the ones that are on there that I was already aware of or already planning to read. Actually, I wasn't planning to read The Evening and the Morning, but someone made a comment about how they were glad there was no Ken Follett on my top 10 historical fiction of all time, which I will leave in the cards above, and made me kind of intrigued. So when this came into the library, I was like, maybe. But however, Shaggy Bane, Utopia Avenue, Codename Helene, Betty, and The Paper Daughters of Chinatown are the 5 that were written in, so I don't expect we'll be seeing those in the final. So, the ones that I haven't mentioned yet that are on here are Where the Lost Wander by Amy Harmon, Deacon King Kong by James McBride, The Book of Lost Friends by Lisa Wingate, The Henna Artist by Alka Joshi, The Jane Austen Society by Natalie, The Book of Lost Names by Kristen Harmel. So those are the 7 that I had never even heard of, so that weren't even on my radar at all. So it'll be interesting to see how many of those make it into the final 10 and which ones win. I will say, right here in the introduction, that The Vanishing Half has nearly 5 times the amount of ratings than the next most popular book, which means I think that The Vanishing Half is going to be chosen as the best historical fiction. And it's one I haven't read yet, but it is one that I intended to because it has had such good reviews. So I'll come back to you on Tuesday the 17th of November and we'll see which 10 I am actually reading for the next 3 weeks after that. Hopefully, fingers crossed, A Mirror and the Light, The Long Petal of the Sea and Hamnet all make it into the final so that I can cut down my TBR a little bit. But I'll see you soon and we'll see what happens. Hello, so they have announced the top 10 for the Goodreads Choice Award, and like I thought, none of the write-ins got in. So here is the 20 that were longlisted. These 5 were the write-ins and so didn't make it, and then these 5 also didn't make it, which means that 2 of the ones I've read, Hamnet and The Mirror and the Light, did not make it through to the final, unfortunately. So the ones that did make it through is The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennet, The Jane Austen Society by Natalie, The Book of Longings by Sue Monk Kidd, The Book of Lost Names by Kristen Harmel, The Henna Artist by Alka Joshi, The Evening and the Morning by Ken Follett, A Long Petal of the Sea by Isabel Allende, Magic Lessons by Alice Hoffman, The Book of Lost Friends by Lisa Wingate, and The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue. So I've managed to get all of these either out from the library or on audiobook or ebook, so I'm definitely going to be reading all of these, and there's a lot of them that I haven't heard of, so hopefully they work out. Hello, so I think I mentioned that they announced the Goodreads Choice Award shortlist. Unfortunately for me, they only picked one of the books that I had already read. and that is A Long Petal of the Sea by Isabel Allende. A Long Petal of the Sea tells the story of two people who meet during the Spanish Civil War. The woman is engaged to the man's brother, but the brother is a revolutionary who dies during the Civil War, and they both have to flee when Franco comes to power. So they flee into France and they end up in a refugee camp there, basically starving and neglected, when Pablo Neruda, a poet and diplomat from Chile, charters a ship to pick up the Spanish refugees and take them to Chile. So then it's about their new life in Chile, their relationship with one another, and the woman's baby, who they raise as their own son. And even though it is actually the man's nephew, their experience living in Chile and what happens when their relationship with the Allende family, Isabel Allende's uncle, who was the president of Chile, and his overthrow and their experience of the military junta and the regime that happened after that. So it is a long family saga, 70 years of this family's history, and it follows their children, their descendants, the people that they meet in Chile, a rich, wealthy family, and their experience as well as refugees in Chile. Allende is obviously very famous for her magical realism, but this book isn't magical realist at all. It is just straight up historical fiction. It was really interesting to learn about this period of time, and I love reading historical fiction that isn't set in Europe or North America, that's somewhere altogether different. And so reading about Spain during the Civil War, and which obviously is Europe, but Chile after that, and the second half of the 20th century in Chilean history was really interesting. The way that Allende writes is quite distanced from her characters, or in a way. She tells you what they're feeling rather than showing you what they're feeling, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. It kind of works, but this writing of a family over the course of history, it kind of reminded me of Pachinko. I mean, I read Pachinko much more recently, but there is kind of distancing in the style of writing, and it's very matter of fact. It's hard to know how much of that is the translator, because Allende always writes in Spanish, and obviously I read it in English. There is some beauty in her writing, but it's not exactly the lyrical prose style that I prefer. I did feel like the history in this was really well researched, which I can't necessarily say for everything else, but partly that might be because Allende lived through this history and was herself a political refugee from Chile during the military junta, although she didn't experience the Civil War in Spain. I liked the passion of her characters. I liked the way that their actions are treated so matter-of-factly, and there's not a lot of judgment going on in the writing style. There's no one who is a bad character. We kind of understand all of their perspectives. So I did really enjoy this book, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. So I am about a third of the way through the Book of Names, and I am literally highlighting bits where I roll my eyes. It's so ridiculous. There's like a romance in it now that's all of a sudden appeared, and of course he's effortlessly charming and a bit roguish, also fiercely protective of her, and like, okay, yep, that's not necessarily bad in a romance, but the way that it's done, it's just like plunked in and you're expected to just go with it because it's the stereotype or it's the trope, rather than because it makes sense in the book, or you can actually feel it from the characters. Like, you can just tell where you're supposed to be feeling rather than feeling it from the characters. I'm constantly being told what they're feeling, what they're thinking. Let's see if I can find the bit I highlighted. She wanted to tell him that she wasn't judging him either, but of course she was. She had been since the moment they met, and perhaps that wasn't very fair. Are you writing for children? Christ, sorry. I'm really not loving this book, but we're going to go with it. We're going to keep going until we get to the end, and we're going to see how we feel. I also have The Evening and the Morning down here with me in case this gets too much and I want to change to a different book. Hello! So, it may look like it's the middle of the night, but it is actually 1:45 in the afternoon. I'm just getting ready to film some videos for Vlogmas. I've just set up my little Christmassy scene. Try and make it a bit more festive over here. I'm getting ready, and I thought I would come and talk to you about some of the books that I've read so far. So, today is Wednesday, the 25th of November. Month till Christmas, very exciting. I can't use the viewfinder as a mirror, that's not going to work. Have finished 3 of the books on the Goodreads Choice Awards, and this is my ranking so far. Although, actually, this is my ranking so far. I don't really find it hard to believe that the Book of Lost Names made it anywhere near this best historical fiction of the year so far. I'm personally offended that it beat The Mirror and the Light, although I understand that it's a standalone and The Mirror and the Light is the third in a very long trilogy, so the fact is that more people are going to be able to read a standalone than read such a long trilogy and vote on it. But this book was bad. This book wasn't just mediocre, oh I understand why people who just want to read light escapist fiction liked it. This book was actively bad. It was about Jewish people during the Holocaust with a writer who'd clearly done no research into Judaism. Like, I am not Jewish or an expert in Judaism by any means, but I know that Jewish people don't kneel to pray, and I know that for Jewish people Passover is more important than Hanukkah, so why are you mentioning Hanukkah every year but not Passover? But it's not just that, like, the writing was so bad, I was literally... Children were talking like adults, she released breaths she didn't know she was holding, there was a random love triangle thrown in for absolutely no reason, everything was really obvious, there was no emotional resonance whatsoever. It was one of the worst books I've read all year. It was truly, truly poorly written. I was just going through making notes. I was like, hate reading it by the end, going through making notes, just being snarky over the whole thing. Honestly, it was ridiculous and I hated it. The Jane Austen Society was more... Like, I'm really leery of reading Second World War fiction anyway, because it's such a huge thing. Everyone writes about Second World War fiction. There's loads of it. And I feel like it's a weird thing to talk about, but it kind of glorifies war and makes a romanticism of the Holocaust, which I think is disgusting. And I don't really feel like World War II fiction does much justice to World War II a lot of the time, and just promotes this romantic idea of America and the UK as the good guys. Aside of that, I read the Jane Austen Society, which was kind of what I thought it was going to be, except not a good version of it. Like, it was said it was for fans of the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, which I do like. And it's the story of these 8 people who, most of them live in the village where Jane Austen died. And then there's also a movie star who comes in and a person who works for Sotheby's, I think. And yeah, they're just trying to save Jane Austen's legacy and save her house. Parts of it felt like just analysis of Jane Austen, which doesn't really make for a great story. And then parts of it felt like trying to shove these characters into Jane Austen narratives. Like there was an Emma romance and there was a Persuasion romance, and I was just like... And all 8 of these people obviously had to have a romance at some point in the novel, and also there was a gay couple involved, there was queer representation. However, that couple's romance was obviously barely mentioned on the page and just it felt tokenistic. There was a lot more focus on the straight relationships, and this one was just added to be like, see, gay people. The pace was really slow, not a lot happened, the plot felt really nothingy, and I don't mind a nothing plot if there are well-developed characters or interesting writing, but this wasn't that, so it was just kind of mediocre for me. So apart from that, I have also got the audiobook of The Evening and the Morning by Ken Follett, because it is the biggest one and I feel like it's going to be too difficult for me to be able to fit in reading the physical copy. I'm thinking The Pull of the Stars and The Vanishing Half are going to be my favourites. That's my prediction. Or any of these ones that I had to read, The Book of Longings. Yeah, I'm gonna predict that those ones are going to get put along Petal of the Sea out of the way, but we'll have to see. Hello, so I just tried to film a crafting video and it turned out I didn't film any of it. So that's how my day's going. It is the 27th of November. I have not read any more. Well, that's not true. I have read more of The Evening and the Morning, but I haven't finished it about this far. So I've still got loads of that to get through. I feel like I've bitten off more than I can chew. Anyway, I'm going to try and read some of Emma Donoghue's The Pull of the Stars now. Try and get my head down and actually start reading. Oh, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed by everything, honestly, right now. I'm just so busy because I've decided to do Vlogmas at the same time that I'm reading all of the books for the historical fiction Goodreads Choice Awards. I've just dropped my camera down a bit. And, you know, so, and I'm also trying to keep up, I'm behind on other stuff that I'm trying to keep up with. Oh, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed by everything, but hopefully, if you're seeing this, it means I managed it, or I managed most of it. Why couldn't people have just chosen The Mirror and the Light and the other one that I can't remember right now that I'd already read? People didn't choose those 2 that I've read. They chose all these books that I've got to get through now. That's it. That's the feeling. Ventilation and sanitation will be our nation's salvation. How very fitting. So I am reading The Pull of the Stars and I'm really enjoying it. I have fallen in love with these characters and I'm about to cry. But I'm gonna give a sort of vague spoiler here, not a real spoiler. But if you don't want to hear any of it, skip to this point. It's a really happy point. Well, a kind of happy point, and it's this far from the end. I think this book's gonna destroy me. So that's fun. You can come back now. But yeah, I'm loving this book. I'm in love. Unless it does something terrible, then this is going to be my number one for now, out of the 4 that I've read. Okay, so I kind of left you hanging last night. I finished The Pull of the Stars yesterday. I loved it. I absolutely adored this book. I loved the writing. I thought it was beautiful. It deals with a maternity ward during a pandemic, and so there is a lot of medical stuff and a lot of quite graphic stuff, but I felt like it was exactly the right line to make you feel like there was a lot of tension and stress, but without it being too gross out. It wasn't like there is blood and gore, but it's not like, it felt like the right line for me anyway. I loved the relationships between the characters. I thought the characters were brilliant. I loved the way it discussed some of the biggest controversies and stuff that have happened in Ireland that have been revealed in Ireland over the past couple of decades, about Magdalen laundries and the industrial schools and the pelviotomies, I think that's what they're called. I can't remember exactly. It does say in here that women were put through because it meant they could keep bearing children, even if it meant they were in incredible pain, because that was the most important thing in Ireland. But yeah, so I thought it was really, really well done, and I really, really liked it. The ending, I could see why it happened so fast, but it did feel just a touch rushed. Not like super rushed and super, because there was a reason for it happening so fast, but I felt like the bit that was rushed, that made sense, but then the end after that rushed bit, I felt like could have been a bit more, there could have been a bit more to it, and I wanted another scene at the end, which wasn't in it, which I would have liked. But yeah, it was beautiful and is currently my number 1 out of the 4 books I've read. I'm also halfway through Ken Follett's The Evening and the Morning now, and I don't hate it. It's like, I think the fact that I got the audiobook is really helpful for me. Although sometimes I find I prefer books I've read in physical form, even though I prefer listening to audiobooks, which does make sense. But anyway, yeah, it feels a bit like a history lesson a lot of the time. I keep being told exactly what things are, like they are described to me very literally, and it makes sense because it is like pre-Norman, and so a lot of it's very different. But some of it's like, oh, well, they did this because it wouldn't have been able to do this because of this. And it's like very simplistic writing, very, very simplistic writing, and a lot of info dumping. And the characters are all fairly flat. But there's a plot, there's an intrigue. It's not very good intrigue because you kind of know what's going on before the characters do, and you're like, how are you this slow? But it's bearable, it's manageable. I don't hate it as much as I hated the Book of Lost Names, in terms of the writing at all. But now I'm going to move on to another one of the book ofs, since there are 3 of them on the shortlist. I don't know why that naming, that style of naming has become incredibly popular this year, clearly. But yes, I'm going to start the Book of Longings now. It's the only thing that's on my to-do list for today. It's got a map. I love looking at maps, and I never come back to them during the story. The next one that I read was The Evening and the Morning by Ken Follett. This is a piece of historical fiction set in 997 until 1003, I think, in England, in the south of England, when there is Viking invasions, and the Normans don't yet rule England, they're still in France, and it is about a boy whose father and the woman he loves are killed when Viking raiders come and destroy his town and take all his riches, and he and his mum and brothers have to move to this other village called Drang's Ferry. This is the prequel to Ken Follett's Pillars of the Earth series, so Drang's Ferry eventually becomes Kingsbridge, which is the town that is part of the Pillars of the Earth series. And then it also tells the story of a woman, Ragnar, who is a Norman, and she falls in love with the Thane, or the lord who's in charge of the area where this young man lives, and she marries him and comes to England, and it's kind of how they end up interacting, and it's kind of just a study of the history of that time, in taking it down to one very specific town. Ken Follett is famous for people who love medieval history, and people who love that kind of historical fiction that involves battles and that sort of thing, although I wouldn't say it's incredibly battle heavy or battle descriptive. It's not like Game of Thrones, although obviously that's fantasy. There are like long battle scenes in that, which there aren't so much in this. There are just mentions of battles and some experience of violence, but it's not quite that direct. There is a lot of violence in this book, and I don't really like the way that it handled sexual violence that much. It wasn't too bad. There are definitely have been worse experience of this. I would just say it was like a moderate level of the way that it dealt with sexual violence. What I would say is that this book felt a lot like a history lesson. Like, it was definitely telling me a lot of the research that he'd done, and it was just dumping it on the page for me to see. So it was talking about how much a penny was worth, what you could buy with a penny, how many sheeps, how many shekels of corn you could buy with a penny. And then it was talking about sheeps. I said sheeps, didn't I? How many sheep? And then it was just saying, like, and then she thought this, because in her situation in this time, this would have meant. And so it felt like it was using this story just to teach me about the time period. And whilst I felt like that would have been interesting if that's what I was going in for, it didn't really feel particularly strong as a story. The characters all felt like archetypes. There was no depth to them, and there was no, like, they were either bad or good. There was no, like, moral grey zone or real humanity to them. They were just very black and white. I think it would kind of work as a, like, dramatised history documentary, like they sometimes have, if they use that with in between talking heads of historians talking about stuff. I feel like that would kind of work, but the story itself is very predictable. He keeps trying to like do hints and stuff of what's going to happen, but it's so obvious. It's like middle grade level obvious about what's going to happen. And yeah, it wasn't, the writing style had no finesse at all. It was very, very straightforward. You could tell, I think, that he used to write thrillers because there was no beauty or fluidity or anything about the language. It was just, this happened and then this happened and he thought this because he was this, and it's just very basic and flat. So if you go into historical fiction wanting to learn, and you really want to learn about medieval England, I guess Ken Follett would work. There was nothing, like, his writing style, whilst it didn't have any beauty or anything to it like that, it also wasn't terrible, and the research was really well done. There was a lot of research and he clearly knows about the time period. So I feel like for something easy to read that has a lot of knowledge and stuff to impart, I think it could be work for you. If you're not really into character development, character-driven stories, you want plot, and you're not really into like fluid, beautiful, floral language, or in-depth psychological studies, you know, the kind of stuff I love. If you're not that kind of person and you just want plot and historical facts, I think Ken Follett is for you. So I'm going to go and read some more of these books, and then I'll come back to you and talk about them in the future. This is really getting out of hand. I am reading 3 books at once because it is Saturday, and Tuesday is the day that I think they announce the Goodreads Choice Awards. So I think my vlog is this is gonna go up the day after. Hopefully I will have finished them by Tuesday, because I have 4 left to read. So I'm currently reading The Book of Longings by Sue Monk Kidd. I am about a third of the way into this. I like the writing style so far, although I think dialogue's really tricky to make it seem realistic, but so far intrigued, want to know what happens. I'm also reading on my Kindle the Book of Lost Friends. Yeah, I'm only like 6% of the way into that on my Kindle, so got a while to go. And I'm a couple of hours into The Henna Artist by Joshi. And today I finished Magic Lessons. So I'll talk to you about that tomorrow morning, because right now I'm just feeling a bit frazzled by how much I have to do. Oh, goodness. But yeah, I'll sit down and have a proper talk with you about how I feel about all the books so far tomorrow. So last night I finished Magic Lessons by Alice Hoffman. Historical fiction is a really broad genre, so there's lots of books in this category that don't really seem to line up very well with each other. But I think that's true of a lot of the genres. Like, they pick broad genres. I'm going to talk more about that later, but the reason I say that in regards to Magic Lessons is because this is a fantasy book. This is a light fantasy book set with a historical setting, which has historically been one of my favourite genres. And I also love books with witches and books set in remote places, so you would think this would be a really good book for me. Magic Lessons tells the story of Maria Owens. She is born in a field in Essex, which is continually called Essex County in the book. I've never heard it called Essex County, even historically. It might have been, but it just seems a bit American to me. She is born in a field and she's raised by this woman, Henna, who is a witch, a witch who has learnt magic, whereas Maria is a witch of the blood, meaning her mother is a witch. Anyway, she was raised there, and then she finds out who her birth mother is, and it ends up meaning that Henna dies and she has to escape. She ends up in Curacao in the Dutch West Indies, and she's working there as an indentured servant, and she meets this man, she falls in love with him, and then they have sex, she gets pregnant, he leaves, and then she meets this other man who is very sick, and to travel to Massachusetts, where she knows the man that she fell in love with is on the ship if she looks after this man, and she develops feelings for this other man as well, and then she ends up in Salem in Massachusetts seeking the man that she fell in love with. This is the prequel to Practical Magic. Practical Magic is about two women who live in a house and are cursed that anyone who falls in love with them will ruin their life, and so this is the story of how that curse came to be, basically. My feelings about this book are a bit confused, and I don't know if it's because I listened to it really quite quickly. If it had been more spread out, maybe I would have enjoyed it more. However, I feel like Alice Hoffman knows a lot about witches and not a lot about the 17th century. I didn't feel like the historical time period felt really real or tangible, which is something that I want from my historical fiction. I didn't really feel immersed in a different time period. And I also felt like I was getting a lot of information about witchcraft that I didn't really care about. Like, there was a lot of lists of what wood is used for by witches that was clearly 17th century or earlier ideas of witches and what they do with different woods, how woods can be healing. And I just didn't care that much about it. I also felt that the characters were a bit flat and everything moved really fast. There is a lot of plot in this novel. If you like novels where lots and lots of things happen, then I think you would really enjoy this novel. But it's not really one that is character driven or deeply psychological, which is what I prefer in books. I just prefer books where I get to know people and where it really goes inside someone's head, rather than one where I feel like I'm watching things play out. That's not what I care for. I care to be immersed and for my books to deal with issues, ideas, philosophical or social, to explore things. And whilst this book was a lot about violence against women and women's power, and women not being granted power and women having to take power for themselves, etc., that really felt very stated and clear on the page, and in a world where women couldn't do this, she was a woman who was going to do this, was literally something that was said on the page. And I just felt like I prefer books that trust their readers more, books that let their readers do more of the work. I felt like I wasn't given any space to do work in this book. That's not to say I think it's a bad book. A lot of the writing was very beautiful. There was definitely some beautiful description in there, and the atmosphere, the magic, felt really strong. I really enjoyed that part of it. It did feel like it was written like a fairy tale or like some dark, creepy folklore, which I do love, generally speaking, and I did enjoy that aspect of this book. And spoilers now, mildly, I don't like an easy ending, and this book had a very easy ending, and I feel like that really let it down as well. I think that this book is a historical romance, which is what I mean when I say historical fiction is so broad. It really reminded me of Dance Upon the Air by Nora Roberts. It had that same magical folkloric quality and romantic aspect to it. There was commentary on ages in relationships and abuse and predation in this book. So if that's something you want to avoid, then I would avoid this book for that reason, because it's done very mildly in a way that when I started reading it, I was like, oh no, this is really bad. But then as I read through it, I could see that she was commenting on that. So overall, I give this 2.5 stars, I guess. I didn't used to give half stars, but I feel like it's not a bad book. It's just much too simple, plot heavy and straightforward a book for me. It's just not my general style, and I feel like that about a lot of these books. So now all I have to do is read The Vanishing Half, The Book of Longing, and The Book of Lost Friends, and then I will be able to give my opinion on which one of these I think is the best historical fiction of the year. Obviously, they haven't included 2 of my favourite historical fictions of the year in the list at all, but which one of Goodreads Choice Awards I think is actually the best historical fiction of the year. Hello, so the Goodreads Choice Awards are going to be announced tomorrow. I've just finished the Book of Longings. I am nearly finished the Book of Lost Friends, and I am about to start The Vanishing Half. So I've got a couple of hours left on the audiobook for the Book of Lost Friends, and then the whole of The Vanishing Half to read today and a bit tomorrow, and then I will see which one has been crowned the winner. I obviously am still in my pyjamas, so I will talk to you later about what I thought about the Book of Longings, and I think I still have to talk to you about, I think there are some books I need to talk about a bit more, so I'll get to that in a minute, but just wanted to note that I am about to move on to the 10th book. It's been a lot of reading, but yeah, this is the one that I think is going to win, because it's had so much hype, and because I think that most people have read this. So I'm looking forward to reading it, because some of the others I'd never heard of, but this one, has been everywhere this year. So we've got 350 pages to read today and tomorrow. So let's go ahead. I do have to go to work today. Hello, so I finished the Book of Lost Friends and the Book of Longings, so I thought I would talk to you about them, and I am a third of the way through The Vanishing Half now. I'm really, really enjoying The Vanishing Half, so I'm going to try and finish that tonight, because tomorrow is the announcement, and then this video will be up on Wednesday, which is the day after the announcement. So, the Book of Longings is the story of Anna, a young woman in Galilee in the 1st century BCE. Or the 1st century CE, yeah. And she is a willful woman who writes about the women that are left out of Jewish scriptures, the women who are abused and raped in the Jewish scriptures, but which is just passed over, and who never have voices and rarely have names. Also, her being a writer is not approved of, but her father is a scribe and kind of lets her get away with it, even though her mother really doesn't approve of it, and nor do other people. In order to help boost her father's political ambitions, she ends up being engaged to an older man who is lascivious and cruel, like when she's 15 years old and he's in his late 30s, I think, or 40. She becomes humiliated and forced into this engagement, even though she doesn't want to. The day that she is introduced to the idea that she will become betrothed, she sees a 18-year-old boy messing about with his sister in the market, and when she trips over, he comes to look after her, and that man is Jesus. And so she ends up married to Jesus. The book bills itself as a story of the wife of Jesus, and it is her story of how she gets out of this life of entrapment in the town in which she lives, and she ends up going to Nazareth to live with Jesus, who is a poor labourer, and so she ends up living with him and his family, and it's kind of about their experience leading up to Jesus's crucifixion, which I don't think can be a spoiler. I think everybody knows that Jesus is crucified. So what did I think of this book? The writing style of this book was a bit hit and miss for me. I enjoyed some parts of it. I thought that the prose was really good, and I thought that she did a good job of developing the characters, particularly Anna, the main character's aunt. Yalta, I really enjoyed her character. I thought she was really well fleshed out, and I could really imagine her. And the same was true, I felt, for other characters. There was definitely development and change of them over the course of the book. However, the dialogue felt really stilted, and I didn't really think that it felt realistic or lived in with the characters. And some of the main characters' thoughts felt in a similar way, that kind of a weird insincerity to them. It's impossible to know, because we don't have many words of women living in 1st century Galilee, because women weren't allowed to write. So we don't know how they would have spoken or how they would have thought. But it feels like the main character Anna is incredibly modern, and not at all impacted by the ideas or thoughts of her time, except for the fact that she hates them and doesn't want to live through them and wants it to be entirely different, and she's like properly modern. And while I can understand that the way that the world would have chafed against her as someone who felt like she wanted to write, and as someone who didn't want to marry the man that was chosen for her, she had none of the attitudes of her time, except in the beginning she lightly displays a not wanting to mix with people who aren't Jewish, not wanting to touch people who are not Semitic, but it's like very light, and it goes away instantly, because we don't want to see our main characters having that flaw, that prejudice, and I feel like it just doesn't feel really involved in the time period. It's clear that Sue Monk Kidd has done a lot of research about the time period, and I did feel like it didn't feel like the whole book was modern. It just felt like some of these attitudes, when you read feminism that was written in the Victorian period, so not that far away from us, they have ideas that are radical in their time but still seem of their time to us looking back. And I felt like Anna would have had some
parts of her that didn't align with us and like rubbed up against us in a funny way. I felt like she was made to be too sympathetic and not too totally honest. There was no, the exploration of gender felt very, very modern, and it didn't, I would have liked it if it had been more involved in the first century, but had reflections and comments on our own society. Maybe that's asking too much, but it's kind of what I like from historical fiction, when it doesn't feel so comfortable. And I feel like a lot of the characters felt really comfortable and modern. This book also avoids Jesus as the Son of God, and it has Jesus like fully fleshed in his humanity. And I appreciate that. I like that he was fully fleshed in his humanity, but it meant that a lot of the things that we know about Jesus, his miracles, for example, are entirely not in the book. They're not in the book at all. Even, and this is a spoiler, so put my hand up, and when I put it down, the spoiler will be over. Anna gets separated from Jesus, and she ends up back with him. And she ends up rushing back to him whilst he's just about to be crucified, and she's too late to save him or stop anything. But then she leaves again before he resurrects. And so Jesus doesn't resurrect in this story at all because of the story doesn't get through to her. And so it just feels really weird that they would leave all that sort of stuff out, whilst also doing the thing that I know a lot of people don't like about historical fiction. So I hadn't noticed this before, but people say that in a lot of historical fiction, women, in order to be like special and stand out of the historical period, have slightly magical powers. When I was reading magic lessons, obviously it's about witches and they're meant to have magic powers. It would be weird if they didn't. But this, Anna has premonitions and can see the future. And it just reminded me of Hamlet, because Agnes, in that, has premonitions and can see the future. And lots of people complained about it in that book. And then I saw it in this book, and I was like, oh, I see, it is a trope. And I don't have my notes on me, but there are several of these books where women have special powers. And I hadn't noticed that trope until it was mentioned because of Hamlet, and now I'm starting to see it in these other books. The other book that I have finished is the Book of Lost Friends. This is split between two timelines. So one of them is in the 1860s and is about Henna, a formerly enslaved woman who has been freed after the Civil War, but is working as a sharecropper on the land where she was enslaved previously. And one day she sees the man who had enslaved her, his illegitimate daughter, coming up to the house, and so she goes to see what it's about, and they end up having to travel across Louisiana and into Texas and through Texas on this big adventure, trying to find the man who had formerly enslaved her so that they can find the papers in order to, because their 10 years are nearly up and they should own the land that they've been working for 10 years, but they're afraid someone's going to swindle them. But the other two women, the two daughters of the master of the house, are trying to find their father to work out what's going on with their inheritance, which is long-winded. Then the other section is set in 1985 in Louisiana, the same place, with a woman who has moved to Louisiana and is teaching at a high school, and she starts to discover the history of their town in which she lives. I don't know how I feel about this book, because some parts of it I really loved and I thought were really well done, and some parts of it I felt were either too cheesy or problematic. So I liked the more historical part of this. I liked the bit set in 1860 more. I thought that Henna was an excellent main character. I found her incredibly endearing, and I felt like she was fully fleshed out. She had flaws. She wasn't perfect, but her emotions I felt really strongly. Particularly, I felt at the ending, I actually got tears in my eyes. Her emotions were so well fleshed out, and I thought that story was really particularly very good. The 1985 story I felt didn't add that much to the book as a whole. And although parts of it were well written and there was a relationship in it, which at first I rolled my eyes at because I was like, this is unnecessary, but then I kind of warmed to. But it felt a bit white saviour. So there is this white teacher who comes in to teach these black kids about their own history, and also to help these kids that everyone in the town thinks they can't do anything and they're just going to be hooligans and teenage mothers, and she's the only one who can see them for what they really are. It reminded me of that film with Hilary Swank, where she gets black kids writing. It just felt like it fell in along those tropes, felt tired, and felt like it was falling into the white saviour idea, which I felt was very unsavoury. I had mixed feelings about this, but this is the one book so far that I had not heard of before this challenge, and that I liked enough to want to read more by this writer. Like, I feel like she has stumbled here in a way that a lot of white writers, when writing about slavery and about uncovering history, does. In some ways she was very respectful, but this, just the white saviour trope thing, I felt really... it just put me off, put a bad taste in my mouth for the whole thing. Whereas the Book of Lost Names was written like bad women's fiction, this was written like good women's fiction. So you know what to go in to expect in terms of the prose style. Yeah, I think I would read something else that she has written, which is good. That is good, that I have discovered something by doing this challenge, because I was feeling a bit like, oh, all of the ones that I was interested in previously were the ones that were good, and all of the ones that I hadn't heard of I have no interest in anyway. Historical fiction is such a broad genre that it feels really hard to say, to read all of these and be like, yes, I mean, I love historical fiction and I'm going to enjoy all of the historical fiction books because they are historical fiction. Historical fiction includes things like Magic Lessons, which was a historical fantasy romance, and it includes things like The Book of Lost Friends, which is just the sort of sentimental Holocaust drama that is so beloved of certain people. Then you have things like The Vanishing Half, which has been so critically and publicly acclaimed, and then you have things like The Mirror and the Light, which are dense historical fiction and literary and really complicated, and I love them, but they're not for everyone. And then you have things like The Evening and the Morning, which is like a history textbook, and so there's such a like broad range that counts inside historical fiction. So I was never going to like all of the book. I guess what I have learned from doing this challenge is that while I say I love historical fiction and it's my favourite genre, it's such a broad genre. And I was watching Kayla from Books and Lala talk about, she read all of the horror books, and I'll leave that in the cards above. And she was talking about how horror is such a broad genre and there's so much in it. All of the genres they pick are so broad. YA is just an age range, it's not even a genre. Horror is a feeling, not a genre. Historical fiction is a period setting, it is not a genre. So I guess that's what I've discovered. Historical fiction, not really a genre. Anyway, I'm going to go and finish The Vanishing Half. I will talk to you then, and then together we will find out who has won. I think it's going to be The Vanishing Half. Hello, so I have finished The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennet, and I absolutely loved it. I absolutely get why this book is so well hyped. This book tells the story of twins, Desiree and Stella, who live in a town where only light-skinned black people live, and everyone there wants to be the lightest-skinned black person possible, and there's a lot of talk about colour and colorism. But they run away from this town to New Orleans, and they end up splitting up, and one of the girls, 10 years later, comes back to the town. She has married a dark-skinned black man and has a dark-skinned black child, and they come back to the town where she grew up, and her sister has disappeared, we find out later, and has married a white man and is passing as white. This novel follows the two sisters, but also their children, their two daughters. It starts in 1968, and it follows lots of historical events such as the killing of Martin Luther King and the 1980s Los Angeles riots, all of which are handled so beautifully. This book is not written in the usual lyrical style that I prefer. It is much more simple, but I think what I loved, but it was eminently readable, and what I also loved was how well Bennet had crafted all of these characters. They felt so real that when I was thinking about other things, I kept bringing back to this book as if it had really happened. It's such a compelling book. I read it in one day. It is so compelling, and it really drives you on to find out what's going to happen, despite the fact that nothing hugely dramatic has happened. This is a book about secrets and a book about identity. It's a book about colour and colorism and what makes a black person. It's a book about the past. It's a book about your past. These two girls have experienced an incredible tragedy when they were very, very young, and it's about how that affected their lives. It's about how racism affects people throughout the course of their lives, and it is about the damage that well-meaning white people can still do. It is definitely a brilliant, brilliant book, and one of the best out that I have read this year. The other one that I've read that I have not yet talked to you about is The Henna Artist by Avni Doshi. This tells the story of a woman who lives in a small town with an abusive husband, and she leaves and ends up in Jaipur working as a henna artist for the rich ladies of Jaipur, helping them with their fertility and feeding them treats that will calm their souls and soothe their emotional troubles. One day her sister, that she never knew existed, turns up on her doorstep, and she tries to pull her into Jaipur society, is working her way up in society, building her own house, trying to become a matchmaker, which would be more profitable than a henna artist. I liked some aspects of this book. I thought that there were some really beautiful descriptions of food, of herbal medicine, of art and of architecture. I thought it was very beautifully described, and I definitely felt like some of the characters were vivid and realistic, but what I struggled with was the plot. It was all very, very melodramatic. There was a lot going on that I was like, really, a lot of impassioned speeches that just didn't feel very true to the characters, and a lot of melodrama. It definitely felt like a Bollywood film, I guess, in the terms of the way of the plot and the melodrama. I'm not a huge expert on Bollywood, but from the few films I've seen, there is a lot of melodrama as well as dancing. Less dancing in The Henna Artist, but yeah, I felt like it just felt a bit over the top and a bit much, and I didn't really feel it as true. I also felt that the ending was very easy, and if you've watched this video or any of my videos, you know that I don't like an easy ending. I want endings to feel earned. Endings that just wrap everything up with a bow kind of annoy me. I want endings where the ending feels earned, or it feels deserved, it feels true to the characters and what happened in the story. And in The Henna Artist, you could see where everything was going from about 2/3 of the way through, and it was going just so neatly and perfectly into a little box. And that's just really not my style at all. I prefer a book to be more ambiguous or more difficult or more true to life. And the ease with which this story ended didn't feel that true to me. So that is it. I've read all 10 of the books that were shortlisted for the Goodreads Choice Awards. The two things that I did notice in terms of themes across all of these 10 books were, one is magic women. As I mentioned earlier, it's something that I hadn't known was a historical fiction trope until Hamlet came out this year, and lots of people were talking about it in relation to that. And it really, really has come across out of these 10 books, I think 4 had women who had magic powers for no reason. 1 had women who had magic powers because it was a book about witches, so that is perfectly acceptable. I don't think anyone thinks it's bad that your witches have magical powers. But in The Henna Artist, this woman's henna has like powers of healing and powers of fertility and stuff. In the Book of Longings, Anna has the power to see the future. Again, in the Book of Lost Friends, Hanny has a power of premonition. It really is something that is used to try and set women apart and make them seem different in historical fiction, which I'd not noticed before, but it is rather annoying. These women can't just be powerful, normal women, can't they? On top of that, another theme that I noticed in these books is probably a theme that I only noticed because it is 2020, and that is the theme of plague. I guess a lot of them are set in historical time periods where plagues and pandemics happened. So it would follow that there would be plague in these books, but it is so weird to read about in 2020. Of course, The Pull of the Stars is about the 1918 flu epidemic, so you'd expect there to be a plague in that one, but there was also plague in the Book of Longings, which I guess is both something that happened a lot in the Roman period and also something biblical, so kind of associates itself that way. There was plague in The Henna Artist, there was plague in The Evening and the Morning, and there was plague in A Long Petal of the Sea and in Magic Lessons. There was plague everywhere, and sometimes it was only a brief reference, and so I don't think it is a theme that I would necessarily have noticed had it not been for 2020, but it is funny what the current situation causes you to draw out of a book. That's why I think a lot of the time books are for a certain time period, because the context of your life makes a big difference to the way that you read a book. I would never have noticed the plague in Magic Lessons or The Evening and the Morning had it not been a plague year in which we are living. This is my ranking. This is of the top 10. This is what I think that I prefer, the ranking in which I prefer. It was difficult to choose between The Pull of the Stars and The Vanishing Half at the top there. I loved them both quite a lot, but I think The Vanishing Half just picked The Pull of the Stars at the end there because of the clever weaving of the story, and because the ending of The Pull of the Stars was just that little bit too fast for me. And then down at the bottom is the Book of Lost Friends, which I will never talk about again. So let's have a look and see what Goodreads thinks. Aha! Historical fiction. I was right. The Vanishing Half won historical fiction. It is the one that has been rated the most by a long way, and so that's why I thought it would win. It's had more readers than any of the others. In fact, if we look here, it had 102,500 votes, and the next most popular, which was the Jane Austen Society, had 35,000 votes. So it had triple the amount of votes of the next most popular one. So clearly it was really high up there. Then we've got the Book of Longings, and the Book of Lost Names comes in at number 4. Then the Henna Artist, Evening and the Morning, A Long Petal of the Sea, Magic Lessons, the Book of Lost Friends, and the Pull of the Stars is at the bottom here of the shortlist. They've included the long list, all of the books that were longlisted. Hilary Mantel comes out, obviously didn't make it into the shortlist anyway, so she was never going to be at the top, but it's still my favourite. I have to admit that I still prefer The Mirror and the Light to The Pull of the Stars or The Vanishing Half. It is definitely, out of all of these books, the one that is right up the top for me. So yeah, and Shuggie Bain is there at the bottom. Won the Booker Prize but came bottom of historical fiction. So what have I learnt from this experiment? Well, I have learnt that I kind of know my taste quite well. The Vanishing Half I had out before it was on the shortlist. The Pull of the Stars was also something I knew I wanted to read earlier on. The Book of Longings was something I was intrigued by, and it's come out, you know, not at the bottom, kind of in the middle here. So I was intrigued by that, and I knew I wasn't going to really get on with Ken Follett. The one thing I would say that I discovered was Lisa Wingate is someone that I would like to read another of her books, because while I felt like there were a lot of flaws in the Book of Lost Friends, it was compelling enough and I liked her writing style enough to want to try it again. It is really interesting to think about historical fiction as a genre. As I said earlier, it's not really a genre, it's just a setting. You've set it in a historical time period. And as you can see from the books here, we've got everything from the 1st century to the 10th century to the 1980s. There's a whole broad range. Some people wouldn't even consider The Vanishing Half historical fiction, because for some people it has to be written at least 70 years after it takes place. For some people it's 25 years. It's so hard to say what is historical fiction, because anything is not written in the present. The historical period of The Evening and the Morning was really important. The historical period of The Pull of the Stars, because it was of that moment, was really important. There were some aspects of the time period that was important in The Vanishing Half, because it was talking about segregation and the breaking down of segregation in one part of it, but for a lot of it, the actual historical time period wasn't the main import in it, whereas in The Evening and the Morning, it's all about the historical period. So it's really hard to draw that line about where is it that the historical fiction part of it is the most important part of the book, which is especially difficult when you're dealing with the 20th century, especially after the Second World War. The historical part of it, lots of people have lived through that. I think any time period where the writer themselves is having to do research about the time period, rather than writing from lived experience, is probably able to be considered historical fiction. But it is quite difficult for me to say that historical fiction is my favourite genre when I only really loved 4 of this top 10 and 6 of this top 20, although admittedly I haven't read a lot of the rest of the top 20. There are a lot of historical fiction books that I really don't like. And I don't think that that's unusual. I think if anyone likes a genre, I'm sure if you're a big fantasy fan, there are a lot of fantasy books you don't get on with, or science fiction, etc. I find that I do feel more drawn to historical fiction than contemporary fiction. Even historical literary fiction over contemporary literary fiction, a lot of the time, I prefer, and I don't know why. But I'm glad I did this experiment. It was interesting to read historical fiction that I would never have picked up. But it does again show me that I do know my own taste, in the same way that when I did that 6 weeks, 6 genres challenge, I discovered that I do know my own taste. I don't know if I would do this again next year. It will be interesting at least to see who has made the long list and see if there is anything there that I'm more intrigued by next year. So far this year, so much of it was just not on my radar or something I would never have picked up. I would never have picked up any of these books had it not been for this challenge. And out of all of them, these ones I didn't like, so it kind of makes sense that I wouldn't have picked them up. I knew that about myself. I would love to discuss in the comments below what you think about historical fiction, how you think about the genre as a whole, what you thought of any of these books, what you consider historical fiction. I would love to talk to you all about it because I think it's a really fascinating topic. Thank you for watching. This was a big video for me and I'm sure it's very, very long, but I did have a good time doing this. It definitely got my analytical brain on for making this. Please give this a thumbs up if you liked it, and if you've stuck through all the way to the end, I really appreciate that. And please subscribe if you haven't already, because I'm doing Vlogmas, so I'm here every day until Christmas, and so I will see you again soon. Bye bye.